September 4th,
This
1944.
is not a gun.
Northern France. 0312 hours. The German major never heard it coming. He stood at the edge of the farmhouse courtyard, cigarette glowing in the dark, studying a map by flashlight. His adjutant was 10 meters away, urinating against a stone wall. Neither of them noticed a shadow in the hayloft window 40 meters north. Neither heard the creak of laminated wood bending under tension. Neither saw the bolt leave the rail. The major's cigarette fell first. Then he did. The bolt had punched through his throat, severing the carotid, and buried itself in the wooden post behind him. No muzzle flash, no report, no sound except the wet collapse of a body and the clatter of a flashlight hitting stone. The adjutant turned confused, fumbling for his pistol. He didn't understand what he was looking at. By the time he opened his mouth to shout, the second bolt hit him in the chest, driving through his tunic, sternum, and lung. He dropped without making a sound. In the hayloft, Sergeant Peter Caldwell lowered the crossbow, exhaled slowly, and began cranking the windlass for the next shot. 2 down, 7 to go. If you believe stories like this shouldn't vanish with time, subscribe. Let's keep their memory alive together. No one at Special Operations Executive Headquarters thought the crossbow idea was serious. When Caldwell first proposed it during a mission briefing in June 1944, the room went silent. Then someone laughed. An intelligence officer called it medieval. A demolitions expert asked if he planned to wear armor too. Someone else made a joke about bringing back longbows and trebuchets. Even his commanding officer, Major Colin Harcourt, a man who'd approved some of the most unorthodox operations in SOE history, raised an eyebrow and suggested Caldwell stick to proven methods. Suppressed firearms, knives, garrotes, tools designed for the 20th century. Tools that had been tested, refined, and deployed successfully in dozens of operations across occupied Europe. But Caldwell wasn't joking. He'd spent 2 years operating behind enemy lines in France. He'd killed men with knives with his hands, with suppressed pistols and wire garrotes. He knew the limitations intimately. Knives required proximity, close enough to smell a man's breath, close enough to feel his body heat. Grappling made noise, boots scuffing on stone, fabric tearing, the inevitable grunt or gasp. Even suppressed firearms weren't truly silent. The well-rod pistol, SOE standard suppressed weapon, was quieter than conventional firearms, but it still made sound. The mechanical action cycling, the bolt sliding back, the brass ejecting, the striker hitting the primer, all created noise. And in occupied territory in the dead of night, with enemy sentries trained to listen for the smallest anomaly, sound meant death. Caldwell had lost 3 men that way. Good men, operators who'd done everything right except account for a sentry 20 meters away who heard a suppressed well rod click in the dark and raise the alarm. The mission collapsed. The men were caught within an hour. They were tortured for 3 days in a Gestapo facility in Cannes. 2 of them broke and gave up safe house locations before they died. The third, a Scottish corporal named MacLeod, bit through his own tongue to keep from talking and choked on the blood. Caldwell survived by luck and a stolen Wehrmacht uniform. He made it back to England, filed his report, attended the memorial service, and swore he'd find a better method. Something that didn't rely on sound suppression. Something that eliminated sound entirely. He found it in a London museum on a rainy afternoon in March 1944. A medieval crossbow, displayed behind glass, labeled as a 15th century hunting weapon used by Burgundian nobility. Caldwell stared at it for an hour, while other visitors walked past. He understood immediately. No gunpowder meant no explosion. No mechanical cycling meant no metallic sound. No brass meant no ejection noise. Just tension, release, and a bolt moving faster than sound could carry at close range. Completely silent at distance. Invisible in flight. Leaving no residue. No smell of cordite. No evidence a conventional investigator would recognize. He sketched the design in his notebook, photographed it with a concealed camera, and brought the images back to SOE Technical Services. They thought he was joking too, until he explained the physics. A modern crossbow, built with steel limbs and aircraft-grade components, could generate draw weights exceeding 150 pounds. That translated to bolt velocities over 300 feet per second. At 40 meters, a steel-tipped bolt retained enough kinetic energy to penetrate a Wehrmacht tunic, a leather belt, and still reach vital organs. The weapon made no sound in flight. The impact was quieter than a suppressed gunshot. Reloading took 12 seconds with a windlass crank, longer than a firearm, but acceptable for selective targeting where silence mattered more than rate of fire. Caldwell wrote a 14-page technical proposal. He included physics calculations, tactical scenarios, historical precedents, and cost comparisons. He submitted it to Harcourt with a formal request for field testing. The major read it twice, made notes in the margins, and sat with it for 3 days before responding. He didn't believe it would work. He thought Caldwell was chasing a solution to a problem that didn't exist. But he also knew Caldwell's record. 19 successful operations, 37 confirmed eliminations, 0 operational failures. If Caldwell believed in something enough to write 14 pages, it deserved consideration. Harcourt authorized a field trial with one condition. If it failed, if it compromised a mission or got someone killed, Caldwell would be reassigned to training duties for the duration of the war. Caldwell accepted. SOE Technical Services fabricated a custom crossbow in April 1944. It wasn't a replica. It was a modern weapon built on medieval principles. The limbs were spring steel, heat-treated, and tempered for maximum energy storage. The stock was laminated ash and walnut, shaped for ergonomics and reinforced with steel pins. The trigger mechanism was machined from tool steel with a pull weight of 3 pounds. Clean and crisp, the bowstring was braided Dacron, resistant to moisture and temperature variation. Draw weight was set at 175 pounds, requiring a windlass crank for loading. Caldwell specified a simple optical sight, a fixed 4-power scope with mil-dot reticle, mounted low on the stock to preserve the weapon's profile. The bolts were custom fabricated from tool steel, 16 inches long, fletched with leather veins, tipped with needle-sharp bodkin points designed to punch through fabric and bone. Each bolt weighed 4 ounces. Each was capable of killing at ranges exceeding 100 meters in the right conditions. Caldwell tested it at an SOE training facility in the Scottish Highlands. He fired 200 bolts over 3 weeks, refining his technique, learning the weapon's characteristics. He discovered it was remarkably accurate. At 50 meters, he could consistently hit a 10-centimeter circle. At 75 meters, accuracy degraded but remained lethal. Beyond 100 meters, wind and bolt drop became unpredictable. He learned to compensate for wind by observing grass movement and feeling air pressure on his face. He learned to judge range by terrain features and estimate holdover by instinct. He practiced reloading until he could crank the windlass, seat a bolt, and acquire a target in under 10 seconds. He practiced shooting from prone, kneeling, and supported positions. He practiced in darkness, in rain, in wind. By the end of May, he was more proficient with the crossbow than most men were with rifles. He wrote a second report. This one was 3 pages. Weapon viable. Request deployment authorization. Harcourt approved it with a handwritten note in the margin. Don't make me regret this. Caldwell deployed to France in early August with a 6-man team. Their mission was intelligence gathering and targeted elimination of German officers in a sector near Rouen. The area was thick with Wehrmacht logistics units preparing defensive positions against the advancing Allies. Supply depots, communications hubs, repair facilities, and command posts were scattered across 20 square kilometers of Norman countryside. High-value targets were everywhere, but so were sentries, patrols, guard dogs, and random security checks. The Germans were paranoid. They'd lost too many officers to partisan attacks and SOE operations. They knew the Allies were close. They knew resistance networks were active. Security was layered, redundant, and ruthless. Standard SOE tactics, approach, eliminate, extract, were too loud, too visible, too likely to trigger alarms that would collapse the entire network. Caldwell's team established a safe house in a barn complex 4 kilometers south of the target area. The barn belonged to a farmer named Du Bois, a resistance sympathizer who'd been feeding intelligence to SOE for 2 years. Du Bois provided cover, food, and local knowledge. His son, a 16-year-old named Luke, served as a runner and scout. The team settled in, unpacked their equipment, and began surveillance. Caldwell's teammates were skeptical of the Crossbow. Two of them, both veterans of multiple operations, openly questioned whether he'd lost his mind. A Welsh sergeant named Davies asked if they were supposed to charge the Germans with swords next. An explosives expert named Thompson said he'd rather trust a knife than a medieval toy. Caldwell didn't argue. He didn't try to convince them. He simply waited for the right opportunity to demonstrate what the weapon could do. It came on the night of September 2nd. The team had identified a high-value target, Hauptmann Ernst Vogel, a Wehrmacht logistics officer station at a requisition chateau 6 kilometers south of Rouen. Vogel was responsible for coordinating fuel and ammunition shipments to forward units. His death would create confusion, delay resupply, and buy the Allies time. Intelligence indicated Vogel was a creature of habit. He arrived at the chateau every morning at 0700, worked until 1900, then ate dinner and reviewed paperwork until 2200. But Vogel was cautious. He slept inside the chateau, protected by sentries, guard rotations, and a Wehrmacht signals detachment in the adjacent building. The compound had 3 gates, overlapping fields of fire, and roving patrols with dogs. A direct assault was suicide. A long-range rifle shot would trigger an immediate manhunt and compromise the entire network. Poison was unreliable. A knife attack required penetrating multiple security layers. The mission seemed impossible. Caldwell studied the compound for 2 nights. He mapped sentry positions, timed patrol rotations, noted light sources and blind spots. He discovered a pattern. Every evening at 2,200 hours, Vogel walked the perimeter with his adjutant and a 2-man security detail. They inspected the sentries, checked the gates, and reviewed the night's password. The walk took 15 minutes. During that time, Vogel was exposed, visible, and predictable. Caldwell identified a firing position in a barn 80 meters from the chateau's east wall. The barn had a hayloft with a narrow window that offered a clear line of sight to the main gate. The window was shadowed, invisible from the compound. The angle was steep, but manageable. On the night of September 3rd, Caldwell moved into position at 2,100 hours. He brought the crossbow, 12 bolts, binoculars, and a watch. He settled into the hayloft, braced the crossbow on a hay bale, and adjusted the scope. Then he waited. At 2,203 hours, Vogel emerged from the chateau. He wore his uniform tunic, a peaked cap, and a sidearm. His adjutant, a young lieutenant, walked beside him. The 2-man security detail followed at 5 meters. They moved along the eastern perimeter, stopping at each sentry post. Caldwell tracked them through the scope. He waited for them to reach the main gate. Vogel paused there, backlit by a lamp inside the guardhouse. He was speaking to a sentry, gesturing at something on the gate. His posture was relaxed, head slightly tilted, weight on his left leg. Caldwell adjusted for the angle, compensated for a light crosswind from the south, and exhaled slowly. He squeezed the trigger lever. The crossbow released with a muted thunk. The bolt flew. It crossed 80 meters in less than a second. It hit Vogel in the upper back, just below the left shoulder blade, angled downward through the chest cavity, severing the subclavian artery and puncturing the left lung. Vogel stumbled forward, his hand reaching for the gate. He tried to speak. Blood filled his throat. He collapsed against the gate and slid to the ground. The adjutant shouted. The security detail ran over. The sentry dropped to his knees, tried to assess the wound. They thought Vogel had collapsed. A heart attack, maybe a stroke. Someone yelled for a medic. By the time they noticed a bolt protruding from Vogel's back, by the time they realized what happened, Caldwell was cranking the windlass, seating another bolt, and scanning for secondary targets. But the compound had erupted into chaos. Sentries were shouting, running in different directions. The gate was closing. Lights were coming on. Caldwell retreated from the window, disassembled the crossbow, and moved out to the barn's rear exit. He was half a kilometer away, moving through hedgerows toward the safe house, before the Germans organized a search. They found nothing. No spent brass. No scent of cordite. No tracks, no evidence, just confusion, and a dead officer with a steel bolt through his chest. The Germans didn't understand what had happened. They searched the area for sniper hides. They interrogated locals. They brought in dogs. But the barn had been empty for hours by the time they reached it. The hayloft showed no signs of occupancy. The window faced the wrong direction for a rifle shot. The angle didn't make sense. They measured the distance, calculated trajectories, and concluded the shot must have come from inside the compound. A theory emerged that Vogel had been killed by a resistance sympathizer among the sentries. 3 men were arrested, interrogated, and eventually released when no evidence supported the theory. Vogel's death was logged as an assassination by unknown partisans using an unidentified weapon. The investigation stalled. The case went cold. Caldwell returned to the safe house at 0230 hours. His team was waiting. Davies and Thompson looked at him differently now. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. They'd monitored the German radio traffic. They knew Vogel was dead. They knew the Germans had no idea how it happened. The Crossbow wasn't a joke anymore. 3 days later, Caldwell killed again. The target was SS Sturmbannführer Klaus Ritter, an intelligence officer stationed in Evreux. Ritter was responsible for coordinating anti-partisan operations in the sector. He'd ordered the execution of 17 resistance members in the past month. His death was a priority. Intelligence indicated Ritter was inspecting a bridge repair crew near the Ur River. The site was exposed, surrounded by open fields with minimal cover. A rifle shot would be detected immediately. Caldwell identified a church bell tower 120 meters from the bridge. The tower had narrow windows facing the river. The angle was extreme, almost vertical, but the line of sight was clear. He positioned himself in the tower at dawn, 2 hours before Ritter was scheduled to arrive. He waited in the shadows, crossbow braced on a window ledge, watching the bridge through the scope. At 0820 hours, a Mercedes staff car arrived. Ritter stepped out, accompanied by a Wehrmacht engineer and 2 SS guards. They walked onto the bridge, inspecting the repair work. Ritter stopped near the center, pointing at something on the span. He was gesturing, speaking to the engineer. His head was tilted back, exposing his neck. Caldwell adjusted the scope, compensated for the angle and wind, and fired. The bolt dropped 120 meters, angled steeply, and hit Ritter in the neck just above the collar. It severed the carotid and lodged in the cervical spine. Ritter collapsed instantly. His guards thought he'd been shot. They drew their weapons, fired blindly into the trees on the far bank. The engineer dropped to the ground, screaming. Ritter bled out in 90 seconds. By the time the guards organized a response, Caldwell was descending the bell tower's spiral staircase, crossbow disassembled and hidden in a canvas bag. The Germans searched the area for hours. They found shell casings near the tree line, old ones from a previous skirmish, and assumed a sniper had been hiding there. They never checked the church. Why would they? It was 120 meters away, on the wrong side of the river, with an impossible angle. The investigation concluded Ritter had been killed by a partisan sniper using a suppressed rifle. The case was filed. Word reached German intelligence in Paris. Reports were arriving from multiple sectors describing similar incidents. Officers dropping without warning. No gunfire. No witnesses. Silent killings. Some analysts thought it was a new Allied sniper rifle. Others suspected poison darts. A few dismissed it as exaggeration, the fog of war creating ghost stories. But the killings continued, and the pattern was undeniable. Someone or some group was eliminating German officers with a weapon that left no conventional evidence. By mid-September, Caldwell had eliminated 5 high-value targets. A signals officer in Lisieux, shot through a window while reviewing radio logs. A Gestapo liaison in Bernay, killed in a courtyard while smoking a cigarette. A transportation coordinator in Argenton, struck down while inspecting a rail depot. Each kill was the same. Silent, precise, invisible. No one heard the weapon. No one saw the shooter. The Germans increased security protocols across the entire sector. Officers stopped walking perimeters alone. Guard details doubled. Schedules became unpredictable. Meetings moved indoors. Windows were covered. Blackout procedures extended to daytime. Paranoia spread to the command structure like a virus. Officers started wearing helmets indoors. Some refused to leave their bunkers. Decision-making slowed as commanders hesitated to expose themselves. It didn't matter. Caldwell adapted. He studied new patterns, found new vulnerabilities, and waited. Patience was his advantage. The crossbow was his edge. On September 18th, he killed 2 officers in a single night. Both were attending a briefing at a commandeered school in Al-Asa. The building was secure, surrounded by sentries, with guards at every entrance. But Caldwell had scouted it 3 days earlier. He'd identified an attic crawlspace accessible through a damaged section of roof. He infiltrated the building during the day, posing as a local laborer hired to repair shrapnel damage. He hid in the crawlspace with the crossbow, 2 bottles of water, and a bucket. He waited for 14 hours. The briefing started at 2,000 hours. It lasted 90 minutes. When it ended, the officers filed out into the courtyard to smoke and stretch. 2 of them, a major and a captain, stood together near a fountain, discussing the meeting. They were 15 meters from the nearest sentry, partially obscured by shadow. Caldwell fired through a dormer window. The first bolt hit the major in the upper chest, puncturing the right lung and nicking the aorta. He staggered backward, confused, blood spreading across his tunic. The captain turned to help him. Caldwell's second bolt hit the captain in the ribs, angling up to the diaphragm and into the heart. Both men collapsed within 15 seconds of each other. The sentry saw them fall. He thought the major had fainted and the captain had stumbled trying to catch him. He ran over, shouting for help. By the time he realized both men were dead, by the time he found the bolts, Caldwell was moving through the crawlspace toward a prepositioned exit point. He dropped out of the building through a coal chute, emerged in an alley, and walked away. The Germans locked down the building. They searched every room, every closet, every crawlspace. They found the dormer window. They found scuff marks in the dust. They measured angles, calculated trajectories, and confirmed the shots had come from inside. But the shooter was gone. Vanished. Impossible. The incident was reported to regional headquarters. An SS security team was dispatched. They interrogated the entire guard detail. Found nothing. No one had seen anything. No one had heard anything. 2 officers were dead, killed by an invisible weapon, and no one could explain how. The psychological impact was devastating. Officers became paranoid. They stopped conducting outdoor inspections. They avoided windows. They refused to attend meetings in buildings they hadn't personally secured. Some started wearing body armor under their tunics. Command cohesion degraded as trust eroded. Decisions were delayed. Orders were questioned. The entire sector's command structure began to fracture under the weight of fear and uncertainty. And all of it because of a weapon that shouldn't have worked. A medieval tool in a modern war. A crossbow that had been mocked, dismissed, and forgotten by history. Until Peter Caldwell proved it could kill more effectively than anything in the Allied arsenal. SOE analysts in London noticed a pattern. They reviewed Caldwell's reports, cross-referenced intercepted German communications, and calculated the operational impact. The kills weren't just eliminations. They were psychological warfare. The 9 officers Caldwell had killed represented key nodes in the logistical and command network. But more importantly, their deaths had created a climate of fear that was paralyzing German decision-making across an entire sector. Officers were spending more time protecting themselves than commanding their units. Security protocols were consuming resources that should have been directed toward the Allied advance. The crossbow, mocked as a medieval relic, had become one of the most effective force multipliers in the European theater. Major Harcourt authorized production of 6 additional crossbows. Caldwell was recalled to England in late September to train other operators. He spent 3 weeks teaching the weapon's mechanics, tactics, and limitations. 3 SOE teams deployed to Belgium and Holland with crossbows in October. Results were consistent. Silent eliminations, psychological disruption, operational success. The Germans never adapted because they never understood. The weapon didn't fit their framework. It didn't match their threat models. It didn't appear in their intelligence assessments. So they kept dying, quietly, one officer at a time. And every death amplified the fear, deepened the paranoia, and accelerated the collapse. Caldwell's final mission came in early November. The Allies were advancing rapidly through France and Belgium. German forces were collapsing, retreating toward the Rhine. But isolated pockets remained, dug in and resisting. One such pocket was near Metz, commanded by Oberst Heinrich Krauss, a veteran officer known for ruthless efficiency and tactical brilliance. Krauss had organized a defensive line that was slowing the American Third Army's advance. His elimination was deemed critical to breaking the stalemate. Caldwell volunteered. He infiltrated the area alone, moving through abandoned villages and shattered forests. The front line was fluid, chaotic, shifting daily. He used the confusion as cover. He found Krauss's headquarters in a fortified manor house 3 kilometers behind German lines. The compound was surrounded by minefields, concertina wire, and interlocking fields of fire. Sentries patrolled constantly. Dogs were everywhere. Standard approaches were impossible. Caldwell observed for 3 days from a drainage culvert half a kilometer away. He noted routines, identified vulnerabilities, and waited for an opening. On the 4th night, Krauss emerged to inspect a nearby artillery position. He wore a helmet, a heavy greatcoat, and body armor under his tunic. He traveled with 6 guards, all armed with submachine guns, all scanning constantly. But Krauss made one mistake. He stopped to light a cigarette, turned his back to the wind to shield the flame, lifted his chin. The gesture exposed the gap between his helmet and collar for 3 seconds. Caldwell was 90 meters away. Prone in the culvert, Crossbow braced on the lip. He adjusted for elevation, windage, and the angle of Krauss's posture. He exhaled, fired. The bolt flew. It hit Krauss in the gap, driving through skin, muscle, and vertebrae. Krauss dropped instantly, the cigarette still in his hand. The guards thought he'd been shot by a sniper. They hit the ground, returned fire into the darkness in 3 directions. Machine guns opened up from the compound. Flares lit the sky. Caldwell was already crawling backward to the culvert, dragging the crossbow, moving toward a prepositioned motorcycle hidden in a barn a kilometer away. Krauss's death broke the defensive line. His subordinates argued over succession for 2 days. Coordination collapsed. Units acted independently, often contradicting each other. The Americans exploited the confusion, broke through on the 3rd day, and rolled up the remaining resistance within a week. The sector fell. The war in that area effectively ended. Caldwell returned to England in mid-November. The crossbow came with him. He cleaned it, oiled the mechanism, inspected every component, and stored it in a padded case. He never used it again. The war in Europe ended in May 1945. SOE was dissolved shortly afterward. Records were classified. Operations were buried in archives that wouldn't be open for 50 years. Caldwell received no public recognition, no medals for the crossbow missions, no commendations. His service record noted his participation in special operations, but provided no details. He returned to civilian life, took a job as a civil engineer in Manchester, married, had 2 children, and never spoke about the war. When colleagues asked, he said he'd done some work in France. Nothing special, just intelligence gathering. When he died in 1983 at the age of 64, his obituary mentioned his SOE service in a single line. The crossbow wasn't mentioned. The 9 officers weren't mentioned. The weapon that terrified an entire German command structure wasn't mentioned. It was forgotten, filed away, lost to history, until 1997. A British military historian named Geoffrey Marks was researching unconventional SOE weapons for a book on special operations. He found a reference in a declassified operational report, a single line buried in an appendix. Crossbow employed with success in selective elimination operations, France and Belgium. September to November 1944. 9 confirmed kills. 0 operational compromises. Marks was intrigued. He'd never heard of SOE using crossbows. He started digging. He tracked down Caldwell's service records, which had been partially declassified. He found personnel files, mission reports, and after-action summaries. He interviewed surviving SOE personnel. One of them, a former signals operator, remembered Caldwell, said he was the quietest man he'd ever met, said Caldwell had carried a strange weapon no one understood, said the Germans were terrified of him. Marks published his findings in a military history journal in 1998. The article was titled Silent Warfare: The Use of Medieval Weaponry in Modern Special Operations. It was dense, academic, footnoted extensively. Almost no one read it. The journal had a circulation of fewer than 2,000 subscribers, mostly academics and retired military officers. The story didn't fit popular narratives about World War II. Commandos use explosives and knives. Snipers use scope rifles. Crossbows belong to museums, not on battlefields. The article generated mild interest in academic circles, then faded, but Marks had preserved the story. And in 2004, a documentary producer named Sarah Hollis read his article. She was developing a series on unconventional warfare. She contacted Marks. He connected her with Caldwell's family. Caldwell's son, Michael, had inherited his father's effects, including the crossbow. It had been stored in an attic for 20 years, wrapped in oilcloth, untouched. Hollis arranged to film the weapon. It was smaller than she expected. Compact, efficient. The wood was scarred. The steel showed where the bowstring had been replaced at some point, but it was intact. Functional. Hollis hired a military consultant to evaluate it. The consultant, a former SAS operator, assembled it, inspected the mechanism, and test-fired it at a range. The bolt hit a target 40 meters away. The impact was quieter than a hand clap. The consultant stood there, staring at the weapon, and said something Hollis never forgot. He said if you'd given me this without context, I'd have laughed. But knowing what it did, knowing what Caldwell accomplished with it, I'd take this over half the weapons we use today. Because silent matters. Invisible matters. And this thing is both. The documentary aired in 2005 on a British History Channel. It included interviews, archival footage, and a segment on the crossbow. The episode generated modest viewership. A few newspapers wrote articles. Veterans groups discussed it, but the story remained niche. Forgotten by the mainstream, the crossbow still exists. It's in a private collection now, owned by Michael Caldwell, who displays it in a locked case in his study. He's received offers from museums. He's refused them all. He says the weapon belongs in his family. It's a connection to his father. A reminder of what one man could accomplish with patience, skill, and a willingness to ignore conventional wisdom. In 2019, a military technology researcher named Dr. Elena Vasquez published a paper analyzing the tactical effectiveness of Caldwell's crossbow operations. She used game theory models, psychological impact assessments, and comparative analysis with modern suppressed weapons. Her conclusion was striking. Caldwell's crossbow missions achieved a higher psychological impact-to-resource ratio than any comparable special operations campaign in World War II. The weapon cost less than 50 pounds to produce. It required no ammunition resupply. It generated zero logistical footprint, and it created a climate of fear that paralyzed German command structures across multiple sectors. By conventional metrics, it was the most cost-effective weapon system deployed by SOE. The story matters because it challenges assumptions. It proves that innovation doesn't always mean newer, faster, or more complex. Sometimes it means looking backward. Sometimes it means ignoring doctrine. Sometimes it means trusting your instincts when everyone else is laughing. Caldwell understood that. He ignored the mockery. He ignored the skepticism. He built a weapon that shouldn't have worked and proved it could outperform anything the 20th century had invented. And he did it quietly, invisibly, one officer at a time. 9 men died in total silence. 9 men who never heard the weapon, never saw the shooter, never understood what had killed them. They were eliminated by a tool from the Middle Ages wielded by a man who understood that sometimes the oldest answer is the best one. If this story moved your heart even once, subscribe. It's the least tribute we can give to men like Caldwell, who changed warfare with courage and ingenuity.